If only she could have been good. My Babbles has a nasty knack of keeping monkeys on her back. The message was etched, not written, crookedly on the back of the door of the second wooden stall of the woman's bathroom of La Cabrita, most likely by some drunk Shania Twain-looking girl halfway to walking off into the Albuquerque night with any guy that had a pickup truck full of gas and the scent of Dracar Noir on his neck. Layla flushed the toilet and touched the words. She closed her eyes and wished the wind from I-40 was back in her face, dusty and hard so she could breathe again. It had been a long night, as they say, and the atmosphere inside the bar was rich with cigarettes and groping hands and eyes that could not meet the light. Not only was she taking a piss in a bar whose floors stuck to her worn leather boots, pawing and pulling her downward like schnapps quicksand, but she had to stumble across this line like some taunting cipher from a New Mexican zodiac, when all she wanted to do was curl up in the back of her car with James, lay out under the soon-to-be 2 a.m. sky, and forget the phone call she had gotten from Las Maravillas. That was over 3 hours ago, long enough for her to order her second whiskey, long enough to have to take a piss, long enough to be face-to-face with Babbles on the filthy wall in front of her face, mocking her with those nasty knacks and goddamn monkeys. Layla pulled up her jeans, perfectly dusted like the surface of the desert, and walked back to the bar, her fingers already reaching into her pocket for the last 20 she had, ready for the soon-to-be third whiskey. James was waiting where she had left him, his lean frame pressed against the counter, his fingers tracing the watermarks on the bar like hieroglyphics. The bartender poured the next shot gingerly, kind of sweetly, and Layla touched his hand as she was wont to do sometimes. "Thank you," she breathed. The bartender nodded once, allowed her fingers to slide the length of his hand, and whispered, "De nada." When he was gone, she lifted the glass and said to James, "Just me and you and my Babbles. Here's to monkeys and the backs they ride in on." James raised his glass in salute, accepting the toast like any other. He knew that Layla was going to delay the last leg of the trip, that he would have to hold the space around her steady, anchoring her in a world without bottom. They had driven from Holbrook, Arizona on account of the death of Layla's mother Vi, stopping in Albuquerque before making the push to Las Maravillas. Home if you please, mama if it fit. But it wasn't, and it didn't. So Layla had pulled over in Albuquerque, and they had come into La Cabrita. James knew better than to talk, so he didn't. He pulled out a cigarette and stared toward the parking lot, watching the wind pick up the dust until it danced ghost-like under the harsh lights before settling. Just a memory of a shape in the moonlight. "Las Maravillas," she scoffed, peering into the bottom of the shot glass as if expecting it to talk. "The wonders," he said distantly. "It's been a long time, Layla. My house down the road from your mama. You always so scuffed up and loud and fiery, like you were waiting for the world to bump your shoulder." He let himself smile, remembering her at 7. "You were a wonder," he said. "Sound and fury in red cowboy boots." James was the only one who knew because he was the only one who had been there. He saw. Beyond the red boots, down to the place where you barred the door and wait out the storm, he saw. Alone, the two of them, they had watched her mama's fall after her daddy died, until there was nothing left but bottles of bourbon and dirty laundry, and little girls who set up tea sets for mamas that only drank Old Crow Kentucky Straight. She was a good mama, till she wasn't. It was near closing time. Soon the bartender would ask for last call, and the clock would stop, and all the wayward bodies in the bar would be forced back into the world, out of the arms of Johnny Walker, who had kept them all so warm for so long. Layla shivered in the heat of the bar. "Do you believe in ghosts?" she asked. "Haunted places, bad places." She thought about her Babbles and all the nasty knacks James didn't know about, because there are some things you don't tell, not even to the one who carries you home and picks you up off the floor when the gin won't let you stand. Like how Mama would threaten suicide if Layla didn't bring her more. Like how Layla would shiver at night, tight in a ball, trying to make herself so small so as not to hear Mama crying or the sound of her own incessant heartbeat. Like how Mama would laugh at things that weren't funny and buy fancy shoes for Layla while the pantry shelves sat barren. There were monkeys everywhere. She didn't need a bathroom prophecy to tell her about the shadows with heartbeats at your heels. James ran his hand through his thick black hair. His hands and eyes were steady like always. Sometimes she thought he was a figment of her imagination, an illusion, a mirage conjured up by alcohol and nostalgia and old westerns. Sometimes she reached out to touch the arm of his leather jacket, brushing her face against the back of his lapel just to make sure she could smell its rosewood and tobacco. "They're a ghost," he said, "but we don't have to see them if we don't want to. And there are haunted places, but we don't have to feel them if we don't want to." He inhaled slowly and turned to face her. "You," he whispered, "don't have to see them or feel them if you don't want to." The lights in the bar flickered, a gentle push toward the door. Layla laid a few dollars on the counter and brushed the hair out of her eyes. "Let me clean myself up a second," she said to James. "You go on ahead. I'll be right behind you." She turned and walked to the back of the bar, comforted by the thought that he would always be there waiting. In the bar, in her mind, in the open road that called them both. Standing in front of the bathroom mirror, Johnny sucks balls, lipstick by some jilted woman across the class. Layla tried to pull herself together. Her mama would have told her to splash cold water on her face, but Layla liked her black mascara too much to give in to such comforts. If comforts could be had in a world where all the edges drew blood and all the surfaces skin knees. Monkeys always seek their own ends. They want and take and linger. Layla remembered how Mama would sometimes sleep for days, the air conditioning in her bedroom blowing endlessly, cocooning Mama up, making Layla inhale sharply as she peered inside the door. One peek so she could tell herself that she wasn't really alone. One look so she could pretend that her bologna sandwich for school was made by a mother the night before. And Mama would emerge from that icy hiatus as if the world had slept with her, as if there was no little girl in the kitchen waiting for lunch, waiting for tea parties, waiting for good night. Her babbles cared only for itself those days. It thirsted, it rested, it woke. As she walked out of La Cabrita toward the Chevelle, she heard James humming. All the days she had known him, there was that. Soft notes like hints of cologne, making you remember things you didn't want to remember, making you wish for things you knew you couldn't have. He hummed like a whisper. She always leaned closer. Without words, they got in the car. Driving down New Mexico 47 towards Las Maravillas, Layla stared up at the night sky. She knew nothing of the names of stars and constellations, only that a New Mexican sky was the last wide-open space on Earth, a sky that could swallow you so sweetly, so effortlessly, you wouldn't feel a thing. She wanted nothing more than to hold one hand out the window and one hand on the back of James's neck and drive until the highway ran out of asphalt and there was nothing but dirt roads and dive bars and hungry, wide-open skies. Mama's body was out there somewhere on a table right now, cold and harmless and unclaimed. No more monkeys to plague her, no more nasty knacks to eat away the fragile places. Layla didn't know what she'd feel when she saw her. She didn't know which Mama she'd see. But none of that mattered right now. There were still miles to go and James's pretty profile in the darkness to look at every now and again. There was the hum of the Chevelle and the Rio Grande off to the west, and the sound of Bob Dylan talking about the times a-changin'. It was all she could have asked for. As she closed her eyes to everything that she loved, she thought about that bathroom stall at La Cabrita and what she'd written before she and James went off into the night. How the words came quickly, how her pocket knife slid easily into the wood. She ran her hands through the back of James's hair, listened to the sound of his voice and the music, and stared up into that dark, ravenous sky. Somewhere miles behind, a poem sat patiently in a bathroom stall. It thirsted, it devoured, it waited. Mama's babbles wiggled day and night, a fish for bourbon from old Kentucky. Dolls and plastic china cups, Mama's empty chair near me. Please, Bobbles, we'd ask, the bottle's now tall. What did she have for evening tea?